Okay, so today we are going deep on something pretty major happening right now. It's the impeachment of the South Korean president, Yoon Suk Yeol. You guys gave us a ton of stuff to work with here, news articles, expert analysis, and our goal today is to really break down what's important, the key takeaways, so you walk away really getting it.
Yeah, for sure. We're not going to just list off facts. We're looking at the whole timeline,
Yeah.
what they are actually accusing President Yoon of, and of course, what's going on right now with the Constitutional Court. Think of it as getting up to speed, but with the kind of background and analysis that helps you connect all the dots.
Perfect. So let's jump right in with a quick overview. This whole thing really started back in December 2024 with that first attempt to impeach Yoon. That one failed, but a second motion actually succeeded. So right now, President Yoon's powers are suspended, and the Constitutional Court is in the spotlight, with everything still going on even now in March 2025. And the thing that kicked this all off was President Yoon declaring martial law on December 3rd, 2024. So yeah, let's unpack that. What were the actual charges that got this impeachment process started?
So the National Assembly brought some pretty serious charges against President Yoon. One was violating popular sovereignty, basically, going against the will of the people. Then there were accusations of him blocking people's rights and stopping officials from doing their jobs, like interfering with the government and people's freedoms. And then there's abuse of power using his position for the wrong reasons. But probably the most important charge, the one tied directly to declaring martial law, was sedition.
Sedition. That's a big deal, especially when we're talking about martial law. And you mentioned those two votes in the National Assembly. Can you walk us through what happened?
Okay, so the first vote on the impeachment motion happened December 7th, 2024. They got 195 votes for it, but 105 members didn't vote at all. Now, even though most of the people there wanted to impeach him, it needed 200 votes to pass. And the reason it didn't get enough was basically because members of Yoon's party, the People Power Party, or PPP, they boycotted the vote. They didn't all show up. Enough to keep it from happening, but not enough for it to actually pass.
So it sounds like a pretty intentional move to stop the impeachment, but that didn't work the second time, right?
Right. Just a week later, on December 14th, they tried again with another impeachment motion. And this time it went way differently. They got 204 votes for impeachment, 85 against, and then a few abstentions and invalid votes. But the important thing is they got way more than 2/3 of the 300 members of the National Assembly. They needed 200, and they got 204. So that second one, it went through.
Yeah, that's a pretty clear win.
Yeah.
So what happened right after that vote?
As soon as they got that second impeachment vote, President Yoon's powers were suspended. That's just what happens under the South Korean Constitution. Then the Prime Minister, Han Duck-soo, he became the acting president. But his time in that role didn't last long either. He got impeached too, which just adds another whole layer to this crazy political situation.
Wow. Sounds like things were really unstable.
Mhm.
So going back to that martial law declaration, why did President Yoon even do that on December 3rd? What was his reasoning?
Okay, so officially, President Yoon said he had to declare martial law to protect South Korea from what he called anti-state forces. That was his whole justification for using these, emergency powers. But the question of who exactly these anti-state forces were and if they were even real, that became a huge point of disagreement.
And how did the National Assembly react to all of that? I can't imagine they were happy about it. Declaring martial law is a really big deal.
You're right. They reacted immediately, and they were totally united. Every single lawmaker who was there, 190 of them, voted to lift the martial law, and it was unanimous across all parties. So basically, the entire legislature said no way to this. And because of all that pushback, President Yoon ended up taking back the martial law order only about 6 hours later in the early morning on December 4th, which really makes you think, why even declare it in the first place if it was reversed so quickly?
6 hours? That is so fast for something so extreme. And our sources also talked about some really intense stuff happening around the National Assembly during that time, like actual physical confrontations. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, it was really tense and chaotic for those few hours. They sent security forces, military, and police to the National Assembly, and they were trying to block lawmakers from getting into the main hall where they meet. So it ended up with clashes between the security forces, protesters who were there, and even the lawmaker staff. It was a crazy scene, showed just how divided everything was and how threatened people felt about democracy itself.
It definitely sounds like a full-blown crisis.
Yeah.
So we have the declaration, the super fast withdrawal, and then this impeachment process kicking into high gear. What were the immediate political consequences?
Well, there was a lot of fallout, and fast. A bunch of important people in President Yoon's own party, the PPP, resigned from their positions, saying they were responsible for what was happening and the impeachment. This included Han Dong-hoon, the PPP leader, and people from their Supreme Council and their floor leader, Cho Kyung-ho. So basically, the ruling party was in chaos.
So even his own party was like, whoa, this is bad. And what about the opposition parties like the DPK? What did they do?
The DPK, which is the main opposition party, they made it clear that the impeachment vote was not the end of it for them. They said they were going to keep investigating President Yoon and the whole martial law thing, which basically meant more trouble could be coming.
And it sounds like those investigations actually did lead to something, right? I remember reading about an arrest.
Yeah, not long after everything went down, they arrested the former defense minister, Kim Yong-hyun. They thought he was a key part of advising President Yoon to declare martial law, and especially to send troops to the National Assembly, which looked a lot like trying to take over. They actually charged him with suspicion of insurrection, a super serious charge.
Wow, that is a big deal. And the National Assembly didn't just stop at the impeachment votes either, right?
Right. On December 10th, just a few days after the second impeachment, they passed a bill to create a special counsel. This would be a permanent group focused on investigating President Yoon and all those accusations of treason that came up because of the martial law. The bill passed with a ton of support. Even some people from the PPP voted for it, even though they were from Yoon's party. So it's pretty clear that the legislature was serious about holding him accountable.
Yeah, it really shows they were determined to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah.
And we saw a big public reaction to all of this, right? I'm thinking of those petitions and statements from different groups in South Korea.
Oh, yeah. People were fired up. There was this online petition going around asking for Yoon to be impeached. It actually started way back in July 2024, but after the martial law thing, tons of people signed it. It ended up with over 1 million signatures, which means under South Korean law, they have to review it in parliament. And beyond that, over 3,000 professors and researchers from all these universities signed a letter saying Yoon should resign. And then you had over 1,400 Catholic priests making the statement calling for his impeachment. They were worried about his leadership and thought his wife had way too much influence. It was a pretty clear sign that a lot of people were unhappy.
Those are really strong statements coming from people who are generally respected. And it wasn't just these formal statements, right? There were protests, too.
Definitely. All through December, you had hundreds of thousands of people out protesting. They were demonstrating against the government, and a lot of them wanted President Yoon to resign or be impeached. But it's important to remember there were also rallies for Yoon, so you can see how split everyone was on this issue.
A seriously divided country. So once the National Assembly impeached Yukar, the whole thing went to the Constitutional Court. What does this court do, and what's been happening with the trial?
So in South Korea, once the National Assembly impeaches the president, it's up to the Constitutional Court to decide if they actually remove him. And they have to make a decision within 180 days of getting the impeachment motion. In this case, they got it on December 14th, 2024, so the clock started ticking then. It just shows how much pressure there is to move quickly.
Okay, so they're on a deadline. And how many people are on this court normally? I think I read about some empty spots that complicated things.
You're right. There are usually 9 justices on the court, but when this whole thing started, they only had 8 because a couple retired, and it took a while to replace them. At first, they need at least 7 to start talking about the case, but to actually remove the president, you need 6 out of 9. Or, in this case, since there's 1 missing, 6 out of 8. And then there was this whole political fight about filling those empty spots. The acting president, Han Duck-soo, didn't want to appoint the people the National Assembly picked, which is part of why he got impeached, too. In the end, the next acting president, Choi Sang-mok, appointed 2 new justices, but 1 spot is still open.
So they're doing one of the most important trials ever, with 1 less justice than usual. And who are the main players in this court case?
Well, Justice Jong Hang-sik is the one in charge. Kind of funny, President Yoon actually appointed him to the court in the first place. President Yoon's main lawyer is this guy Kim Hon-yeol, who used to be pretty high up. He was the head of the Korea Communications Commission. And the person representing the National Assembly, basically, the one arguing for impeachment, is Jung Chong-rae, who's a big deal in the Assembly. These are the guys doing all the legal back and forth and figuring out what evidence is allowed.
Okay, so it's like a legal all-star team. And I know they've had a bunch of hearings already. Can you give us a rundown of how the trial has gone?
The court knew this was a big deal, so they got right to it. They even said it was a top priority for them. The first prep meeting was December 27th, 2024, and then another on January 3rd, 2025. These were mostly to figure out stuff like what are the exact charges, what arguments are each side going to make, and when are all the other hearings. The main event, the oral arguments, started on January 14th. Then they had a ton of meetings throughout January and February. Some of the important dates were January 16th, 21st, 23rd, then February 4th, 11th, 13th, 18th, 20th, and 25th. That's when they did all the official arguing, questioned witnesses, and argued about the evidence.
Sounds like a lot of work packed into a couple months.
Yeah.
And what were the biggest disagreements? What did the witnesses say?
The main thing they were arguing about was whether President Yoon actually ordered the military to force lawmakers out of the National Assembly during that short time when martial law was in place. That was like the core of the whole impeachment. They had a former Special Warfare Commander, Kwak Jong-gun, testify. What he said made it sound like President Yoon did give that order, but Yoon denies it totally.
Our sources mentioned something about the words they used, like the difference between lawmakers and agents. Why was that so important?
Yeah, so President Yoon's lawyers were trying to say that if he did tell anyone to be removed, he said to remove agents, not lawmakers. Like maybe there were some other people in the assembly at that time. But Commander Kwak said when he heard the order, it was about a number of people. And in Korean, that sounds a lot like lawmakers. Hafa. And he swore that there weren't any agents in the main hall when the order was given. The legal experts we saw on that Rangan News YouTube video thought this whole word thing might not even matter that much to the court. What's more important is, did the president use the military to mess with the legislature, regardless of who exactly they were trying to remove? It seems like the court was really focused on whether the witnesses were believable and if there was any proof, like maybe someone heard the order over the loudspeaker in the assembly.
So they were trying to figure out what actually happened and why. What else did President Yoon's lawyers say?
They argued that declaring martial law was totally necessary. They said it was a response to a serious national emergency. And they kept saying it only lasted a few hours and didn't really restrict anyone's freedom. They even brought up the idea of presidential immunity, saying that presidents can't be punished for things they do as part of their job. They even mentioned that Trump v. United States case from the U.S. Supreme Court to back them up. It's interesting, at first they were accusing Yoon of insurrection, but then the National Assembly dropped that charge, probably to make the trial go faster so they could focus on the parts about violating the Constitution. Oh, and during one hearing, Yoon actually admitted he sent soldiers to the National Election Commission, still claiming that the election was rigged, even though there's no proof of that.
Wow, admitting that during your own impeachment trial is kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
And what about the other people who were involved? What did they say when they testified?
So the former Interior Minister, Lee Sang-min, he said that nobody ever told him to cut off things like power and internet to media outlets that were criticizing the government. Then there was some conflicting stories about whether the First Lady, Kim Keon-hee, talked to the National Intelligence Service while martial law was happening. And before he got impeached, the acting president, Han Duck-soo, said that a lot of people in the cabinet were worried about the martial law, whether it was even legal. And then you had this guy, Cho Ji-ho, who's the head of the police. He just refused to show up at the court, said he didn't want to incriminate himself because there are other investigations going on.
So lots of different stories, legal stuff, and political maneuvering. I also read that President Yoon's lawyers tried to get some of the judges removed from the case. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, they asked the court to remove 3 of the 8 justices because they thought they might be biased. They said one of the justices had posted stuff online criticizing President Yoon and supporting the opposition leader. And another one, his family was connected to someone who publicly supported the impeachment. And the third one, her husband signed a statement saying Yoon should be impeached. But the court looked at all that and said, nope, they didn't think it was enough to say the justices couldn't be fair.
So the court was like, you're going to have to do better than that. And then towards the end, didn't President Yoon try to make some deals, like offering to change some stuff if he got his job back?
Right. It was during one of the last hearings. Yoon said that if the court threw out the impeachment and let him be president again, he would change a bunch of things in the government and even try to rewrite the Constitution to get rid of the presidential system. He even hinted that if he got those reforms done, he might leave office early. Of course, he kept saying he was innocent about the whole insurrection thing and trying to stop the National Assembly from doing their job. It was a pretty big move. Could have been a way to try and save himself.
Pretty big offer. Could have really changed things. And the government did something pretty unusual to protect the court as they were about to announce their decision, right?
Yeah, they basically shut down the airspace over the Constitutional Court in Seoul for a whole week in March. They wanted to make sure everything was secure. And the National Police went on high alert the day they were supposed to give the verdict. It shows you just how worried they were about how people might react.
Okay, so let's talk about the experts. We watched that Orang News video on YouTube. What did they have to say about how the trial was going and what were the big legal and political issues?
Overall, they thought the court was doing a pretty good job, especially considering how politically charged this whole thing is and all the legal details. They said the court had to balance moving quickly, like the Constitution says they have to, but also make sure President Yoon got a fair trial. They even compared this case to the impeachments of Roh Moo-hyun and Park Geun-hye and said they're moving at about the same speed, which shows they're trying to follow the rules.
And what did the experts think was the biggest question the court had to answer?
They said the most important thing was deciding if what President Yoon did during that martial law time was a big enough violation of the Constitution to kick him out of office. They were really looking closely at him sending soldiers to the National Assembly, why he did it, what he was trying to do. That was the heart of whether he broke the Constitution or not.
What did they say about the whole lawmakers versus agents thing?
Like we said before, they didn't think that was going to matter too much in the end. They said even if President Yoon didn't specifically say remove the lawmakers, the fact that he sent the military so close to the legislature was a huge problem. That alone raises questions about separating the powers of the president and the National Assembly. One expert even said it didn't make sense that they would need to drag agents out of the assembly hall, so it seems more likely that they were trying to stop the lawmakers from meeting to vote.
Did the experts say anything about the stuff President Yoon's lawyers kept asking for, like having hearings every week and calling more witnesses?
They pretty much agreed that the court probably wasn't going to give Yoon weekly hearings because both sides, the prosecution and the defense, already had the same amount of time to present their case, and you could argue that Yoon's lawyers had more resources. They also thought the court wouldn't want to call any more witnesses unless they had something really important to say that would change the case. And about Yoon wanting them to cancel his detention warrant, the one for the insurrection charges, the experts talked about all the legal arguments his lawyers were using.
And what about that empty spot on the court? What did they say about how that could affect things?
It was a tough one. They talked about how important it was to have all 9 justices there for such a huge decision, but they also wondered if it was fair or even practical to have someone new, like Ma Eun-hyuk, come in at the last minute. If he joined now, they might have to go back and look at all the evidence and arguments again, which would take forever. But they also pointed out that when they impeached President Park Geun-hye, there were only 8 justices, and they all agreed on the verdict. So having all 9 would be good, but it's not like it would be impossible to make a decision without them.
Okay, so last thing,
Yeah.
the polls. What did they say about what the South Korean people thought about all this?
Basically, from December 2024 through February 2025, the polls show that most people supported the impeachment or wanted President Yoon to resign. Some of the big polling groups, like Real Meter and Gallup, did polls right after the impeachment vote, and something like 75% of people wanted him out. And it seems like people's political beliefs had a lot to do with it. People who thought of themselves as progressive or moderate were much more likely to support impeachment than people who were conservative. And different age groups had different opinions, too.
And how did people see the political parties after President Yoon got impeached and his powers were suspended?
There was a Real Meter poll in the middle of December 2024, right after Yoon was suspended, and it showed that people's views had really changed. Most people didn't see the PPP, Yoon's party, as the ruling party anymore, and around the same number of people thought the DPK, the opposition party, were in charge now. So the impeachment really shook up people's ideas of who had the power.
Did the polls say anything about whether people trusted the Constitutional Court to do their job fairly?
Yeah, Gallup did a poll in February 2025 about that. A little over half of the people, like 52%, said they trusted the court to be fair in the impeachment trial. And another poll showed that most people thought it was important to fill that empty spot on the court before they made a decision. So it seems like people really cared about the process being legitimate.
So to recap, President Yoon got impeached back in December 2024 after he declared martial law. Now it's up to the Constitutional Court to decide what happens, and they've been having this big trial with lots of legal back and forth, witnesses talking about the military at the National Assembly, and the whole country's divided on what should happen.
Exactly. We still don't know what the court will say, but whatever they decide will have a big impact on South Korea's future. If they overturn the impeachment, President Yoon gets his job back. But if they remove him, they'll have to have another presidential election within 2 months. So Yeah, things are pretty tense right now.
Definitely a big moment for South Korea. So as we wrap up, here's something for everyone listening to think about. We're seeing a really important balance being tested here. The president's power to do what he thinks is best in a crisis versus the legislature's ability to keep him in check. What happened with this impeachment really makes you think about how democracy is supposed to work. Whatever the court decides, what do you think all of this means for South Korea in the long run? Does this say something about how much power the president should have and how to make sure they're accountable? These are big questions that go way beyond just this case. Thanks for joining us today. We'll be back with another deep dive soon.